Good morning, class. All right, so today we're going to talk about cell communication. If you think about it, it's key in development of multicellular organisms because you have to have that communication to operate as a whole. So if you think about way back in history for yourself, you were once an egg cell. You weren't actually yourself because you needed to have a sperm come along and connect with that egg cell to become one. You were actually just, that's called a zygote. Okay, so you were just one cell. Okay, so didn't need cell-to-cell communication, but as one became two, and then two became four, so forth, so on, building up. You now are a complex organism of about 100 trillion cells. Okay, so to operate effectively as a complex organism like that, you have to have communication between the cells. All right, so I want to focus right now on short distance communication. Okay, sometimes you can have just physical contact between cells. Animal cells have a structure called plasmodesmata, which actually there's a link between the cells, so chemicals can go back and forth. Animals have gap junctions when cells touch each other, so things can go from one side of plasma to the other. Okay, you can also have what is called paracrine communication, where a chemical is released by one cell and it just goes off into that area. And then you can have endocrine or hormonal, which would be long distance. Okay, but also you can have this kind of short distance I'm going to talk about here. We dealt with neuronal transmission before when we talked about active transport and setting up that sodium-potassium pump, okay, which sets up a electrical gradient. Okay, so if this is a nerve cell here, okay, and there's a nerve cell here, and there's a connection between the two of them, which we'll talk about in a second. But in these nerve cells, you have that action potential set up, not action potential, but the resting potential set up by this active transport. Okay, so if you remember active transport, you pump out 3 sodiums and 2 potassiums back in, but because of that imbalance there, 3 positives out, 2 in, you set up a called a resting potential of negative 70 millivolts. Okay, so the inside of a neuron has a little bit of a negative charge compared to the outside. Okay, so we saw that the resting potential. Right, so that nerve cell has that electrical, almost like a little battery. It's ready to go, but it's not firing yet. So you set that up. All right, but how do you get a nerve transmission so you can act? So right now you're picking things up with your eyes and hopefully going to your brain. A lot of these are going on right as we speak. Right. So here's how it happens. Let's start right here. We've got an action potential, which means we have a wave of electricity, which will generate this way in a moment. Okay, so when that wave of electricity gets to the end of the cell, this is called a presynaptic cell. This is the little space in between is called the synapse. When it gets there, okay, it opens up these channels and calcium rushes in, okay, into the end of this axon, it's called. The end of that neuron is called the axon. And what this calcium does, it triggers these little vesicles here, which are filled up with neurotransmitters. Okay, so neuromuscular transmitter actually happens to be this ACH or acetylcholine, but you have a whole bunch of different ones in your brain. You have dopamine, you have epinephrine, serotonin, there's other neurotransmitters, okay? But it depends on the nerve. But these, when that happens, calcium comes in, it triggers the release, the exocytosis of this neurotransmitter into this synaptic space. This is greatly enlarged. It wasn't until they got really pretty sophisticated microscopes that they actually see there is a tiny space between these neurons. Okay. So this, these neurotransmitters get into the space. They're represented by these little dots. Okay. And now we have what is called these little chemical messengers here, okay, or neurotransmitters. They're given this name of ligand. Okay, that's a general term for using any sort of signal molecule. Okay, so in this case, the signal molecule is a neurotransmitter. Okay, but there can be other ones too for different functions. Okay, in this case, we're using acetylcholine. So then it travels across this space here, and it reacts with a receptor protein over here. Okay, and when these lock into the receptor protein, it actually triggers these gates to open. Okay, so they're called ion gates or sodium ion gates. They open up, okay, and that allows the the sodiums to rush in. Okay, so I have that over here. So these gates open up, so sodium rushes in, and it actually causes this wave of what they call depolarization, because this sodium comes in here, okay, and it causes this go all the way down the neuron. All right? Okay, so that's an example of this communication between, this is called a presynaptic neuron, and this is the postsynaptic. Okay, in response, they'll open up these gates and sodium rushes in, and that causes this wave. It goes all the way down, and so this would be coming down the axon that way. Okay, so if we start here, before anything happens at negative 70 millivolts and spikes up to positive, okay, then those gates close up and then you get a repolarization down there. All right, but this is a great example of a short distance communication, okay, within vertebrate bodies.